without further ado, let me introduce our first guest, who came all the way from Los Angeles here to attend this meeting. And Paul Krehbiel is a former organizer for SEIU 660, and he's an author. He's written a series of articles in the labor notes on the strong stewards councils and the need for the labor movement at the grassroots to have a strong shop stewards movement.
I worked for probably 15 or 20 years as a worker on the job, and then in the late 90s went on staff at SEIU Local 660. And one of the things that I saw right away was that there was very little internal organization. Local 660 at that time represented about 50,000 LA County employees. And I was assigned to, well, the first major assignment I had was at the second largest hospital in the county, which was at Harbor UCLA Medical Center. I remember that there was about 1,700 workers were represented in the union. There was about 4 or 5 stewards. 3 were so demoralized they were ready to quit. And I got 15 phone calls a day as the rep from members complaining about how horrible things were. Nobody is helping us. Where is the union? They saw the union as, you know, in an office in downtown LA, not at their work site. And how can we get out? So this was my introduction to SEIU at this particular facility. And I learned as I worked there additional years and got to know reps and members in other facilities that this was not uncommon. So based on some of my past experience, I knew that the only way to resolve the problems at Harbor UCLA Medical Center was to build a stewards network. And I'm not going to go into all the details on how we did it, but we were successful. We picked basically one small work unit at a time, so it was something manageable, and we conducted an issue campaign, and we had certain criteria for which work groups we selected. And one of our goals was, out of each of these campaigns, was to try to recruit at least one steward. And then we set up a steward training program, and once we got up to about 10 or 12 stewards, we set up a temporary or interim stewards council. And then once we got up to about 20 stewards, then I think we had elections for officers, and we continued to recruit. And our goal was, and this was something that was discussed among the stewards, our goal was that we wanted to have at least one steward in every single work area on every shift, in a ratio of, initially we set about 1 steward for every 20 workers, and then we kind of lowered that even to 15, and if you can get lower than that, that's better yet. I didn't say anything to my supervisors in SEIU because I wasn't sure how they would feel about me doing this. But eventually the word got back that I was doing this. And I remember one evening I was outside of my supervisor's office, and I tried to get along with her. I tried to get along with everybody as well as I could, and I thought we got along, you know, fine. And I was kidding with her, and I said, you know, gee, we've got to stop working so late like this on a Friday night. This was a Friday night. It was about 7 o'clock in the evening. Now, this particular supervisor and a number of the others, when I say supervisors, I mean supervisors for the union. They worked for the union, and they supervised kind of field staff. Generally, she was out of there by 2 or 3, pretty much on Fridays, and a lot of the other directors were not really, or, you know, some of them put in some hours, but a lot of them didn't. So I was trying to kid with her a little bit, and she turned to me and she said, well, you know, if you weren't doing those steward training classes and steward recruitment down at Harbor UCLA Medical Center, maybe you could get out of here at a reasonable hour. So I knew then that this was not something that they looked on very favorably. When I got up to about 30 stewards, I think they were really starting to get nervous because some of these stewards that were starting to get active now in the union, they started seeing themselves as the union. And they saw the Stewards Council at their facility and their members as the union, and not necessarily the people that worked at the union office. So they would come to union meetings now, where they didn't come that much before, and they would ask questions, and they would ask for certain things, and often this made the folks in charge uncomfortable. So at that point, they pulled me out of there. They took me out of that facility, gave me some other assignment, and then ultimately I wound up at LEC Medical Center, which is the largest hospital in LA County, and it's the largest county facility. We represent probably 3,000 workers in that hospital. So it was another rep and myself were the reps at that hospital. There was already a Steward Council at that hospital, and there was maybe 20 or 30 stewards in the Stewards Council, but it was not a real active Stewards Council. It was a Stewards Council where people would come, they would sit in an audience, and somebody would give a report, one of the leaders of it would give a report, and then people would kind of go back to work. So in meeting with the leaders and the other members of the Stewards Council, we had a lot of discussions about how to become more effective. And we set up a little subcommittee, and we developed a plan to engage in an aggressive steward recruitment campaign, identify issues, and particularly group issues in different work areas, and put together a campaign to fight and try and resolve those issues, and really strengthen the Stewards Council. And we did that. Within a year and a half or so, we were up to over 70 stewards, and we were much more active. Now we put out a monthly newsletter, and it was, it was clear the union was really, had generated some effectiveness and some power on the job at that facility. We started finding that, and the same thing happened with this group of stewards. They would raise questions about how things were done with the leaders of SEIU at SEIU meetings. They would feel that they were, we really missed the boat on taking care of such and such a problem. And they would be given some excuse for why the union didn't put more effort or resources or energy into dealing with a particular problem. Well, this can only go on for so long, and eventually people get angry when this happens repeatedly. And so they started then speaking out more critically about the leaders of SEIU Local 660. And when that happened, then we found that some of the people in the leadership of the union were going out to the facility and trying to undermine our stewards to the members. Okay, so that's just some background. So now and really actually this is getting up pretty close to the kind of changes that are taking place in SEIU all over the country. Several years ago, when the new Unity partnership was formed, there was some of us that tried to follow it as closely as we could and to try to get an understanding of where this is going. And some of the ideas that came out of that new Unity partnership, well, let's just say they were mixed. In other words, and Andy Stern, I think, was really the driving force in this and is now the driving force in the change in SEIU and also in the formation of Change to Win. And some of the things that he identified as problems, I think he was right about. When he said, look, we have a real concern that the percentage of workers in this country who are in unions is very low, and it's getting lower. It's went from 12% to 11 to 10 to 9 to I don't know where we are today. And he says this is a concern. And I think most everyone would agree, yes, it is a concern. We need to do something about that. When he said that we should try to focus attention on industries and try to group workers who are in the same industry together in the same union, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Of course, the devil is in the details. It's a little bit, it's easy to say that theoretically. It's a little bit more difficult than to go to unions and members who have been maybe a member of a particular union for a long time. Maybe they want to stay a member of that union, and then you come in and you tell them, oh, you know, we really think it would be a good idea if you left this union and went and joined this other union because they've got more of your type of workers in that union. Theoretically, it makes sense, but I don't think it's something that can be done by fiat. I don't think it's something that just can be mandated because it makes people feel that they weren't consulted, that they're not considered, that their views and their interests are not of concern, and that when that happens, then you're creating internal problems in your organization. And then one of the other issues that Andy Stern raised, which I think he was right about, was he said, look, you know, we're dealing with multinational corporations today, and we have to make alliances with unions in other countries. And what form that takes, I mean, there's a lot of ideas about what form that should take, but the basic concept of building relationships with unions in other countries, especially where we have common employers, certainly that makes a world of sense. Unfortunately, the piece that I think then is, well, okay, let me just then finish. People probably everybody here is familiar with these arguments, but let me just finish then the the basic program that Stern put forward in the group around him, and that was, okay, so what we need to do is the main thing that we've got to do to really turn the labor movement around is we have to change the structure of it, pretty much at the top. And if we make these structural changes, we'll create larger local unions, we'll create larger regional bodies, we'll create larger national bodies, we'll have these relationships internationally, that will allow us to really maximize our power to do better at the bargaining table, to do better in the political arena, and so on. There's some truth to that. However, combining forces can take place in many forms. You can do it through a federation. You don't necessarily have to take 7 unions from Santa Barbara to Riverside and combine them into one local union, which is what they just did in Southern California. You could set up a body that would allow those 7 unions to meet and share information and collaborate with each other, but allow each one to have its own autonomy and continue to function as a local union. That could have been one of the options, but that's not the option that Stern has put forward. And what we're seeing in California is really the model for the whole country. And this model has already been done on the East Coast to a large extent. So this is something that they've already made their mind up on. I'm always interested when I read articles and Stern or others in his group say that, oh yeah, we have had a full discussion in the union about these issues. Not in Local 660. I mean, I would say 99% of the members don't have a clue of any of this stuff. So I'm not quite sure where the full discussion is taking place, but it's certainly not among the members or the overwhelming majority of them. Okay, so in my view, what are the weaknesses in this plan? And I think there are. I think on the plus side, he's identified real problems, and he's talked about some global things that we can do to fix the problems. But when you get down to specifically how is it being done on the ground, then I think we run into a lot of problems. And so what's happened in the merger in Southern California, myself and I think a total of about 20 staff people were purged in the merger. I've talked to people, I've talked to union stewards at LAC-USC Medical Center where there was a very strong stewards council, and they've told me that were still functioning, because they were functioning even before I got there, and they got stronger, and they were strong enough that even without a rep there, they're still going to be able to function. They're not going to be able to do as much, but they're still going to be able to function. And they say they're still functioning, but what they have said is that there have been efforts on the part of SEIU to come in and try and undermine their work. For example, the latest thing that happened, the other rep who was at LACUSC with me, and who was also part of this building the Stewards Council, also is really a fairly effective leader in the Latino community in LA. He was one of the people that helped organize the Chicano walkout in 1968. When he was purged as well, he contacted the Stewards Council and said that he would like to come to the next Stewards Council meeting, this was about 2 months ago, and just give a brief report on, what's happened, because none of this information made it to the members. He came to the Stewards Council. A representative from the new merged union now in Southern California is now called Local 721. So one of the, we call them management level people in the union, came out to the facility and told this former rep, oh, you can't be here. And he said, well, yeah, but I was invited by the Stewards Council to come to this meeting, and I'm going to just give a brief report, and then I'll leave. And the person from the leadership of SEIU said, no, I want you to leave right now. And the Stewards Council said, wait a minute, we invited him, and we'll show you, let's let the Stewards Council decide whether they want him to stay. There was a vote. There was a little bit of discussion first, then there was a vote, and unanimously every single steward said, yes, we want him to stay, we want to hear what he has to say. This representative of SEIU then left the room. Generally, the formats for our Stewards Councils is we meet one Wednesday a month for 3 hours. The first hour we have a Stewards Council meeting from 9 to 10, and at 10 o'clock, management from the hospital comes in, and we have a labor management committee with them where we address a number of concerns that we have with them and see if we're making some progress on some of the issues that we've discussed with them. But the first hour is our Stewards Council meeting. It's just the union people. And this was the meeting where this rep was at and was told to leave by a representative of SEIU. So now this SEIU representative left the room after this vote was taken to allow the rep to stay, and went and then came back in right about at 10 o'clock and said, the meeting with management has been canceled. And the Stewards Council folks said, what do you mean it was canceled? We've never canceled a meeting. All the meetings that are scheduled, unless they get canceled a day or two in advance, once we have our meeting at 9 in the morning, I can't remember a time when at 10 o'clock management didn't come in and have our meeting. So what are you talking about? You canceled it, didn't you? Well, he denied that he did, but everybody believed that he did, and they lambasted him, and he ended up leaving. But that's just one example of the efforts that are being made by SEIU to undermine really kind of the self-direction and self-empowerment of workers on the job. And that is very disturbing. It's not only disturbing because it's an affront to these workers. This is their union. That's always the way I looked at it. When I became a staff person, I saw my job as trying to help the members build the kind of union and take on the kinds of issues and solve the kinds of problems that they wanted. I saw my job is to help them because it's their union. It's not my union. They're the ones that have to go into work every day on this job, not me. So that's one problem with this approach. The second problem is when a union talks about maximizing power, if they don't empower the rank and file, they've now lost the greatest power that they potentially could have. if we look at labor history and we look at especially the organizing that was done during the SEIU years in the 30s and the 40s, the real power that took place in those years was because hundreds of thousands of rank and file workers were mobilized to take action on their own behalf and to protect and advance their own interests on the job and beyond. Once an organization strips that power or attempts to strip that power or undermine that power from the members, then you've greatly weakened the organization. And so then what happens is the people running the organization are left with one of two options. One is they don't take on too many fights anymore, or the ones that they do take on, because they don't really have the clout to force management to come to a better resolution, the leaders of these kinds of unions are left with only being able to cut some kind of deal with management. And generally, when deals are cut and the members are not involved, more often than not, the members get the short end of the stick. So the better solution is we've really got to be about building formations that empower members on the job and doing everything we can to protect and nurture that development. And what I see going on in SEIU now, at least in Southern California, and I believe it's going on across the country, it really is undermining that.
My local, it used to be called Local 250, and it is the earliest, oldest healthcare workers union in the United States. It was born out of the general strike in San Francisco in 1934, and it had a long-term relationship as the representative union for my employer, Kaiser Permanente. And so the history goes way back, and when Henry Kaiser was alive, it was apparently a more harmonious relationship, because even though he was a steel magnate, very wealthy man, he realized the importance of having a healthy workforce. So he always advocated for that, and that's how Kaiser was born. About 2 years ago, a movement started, it probably started earlier, but we voted on it 2 years ago, to merge Local 250, which was predominantly, it was a healthcare union, but it represented not only Kaiser employees, but also employees in various hospitals in the Bay Area, and the nursing home workers, home health care workers, ambulance drivers, a broad range of people involved in health care. And the decision was made that we should merge with the Southern California Local 399, which was a major health care local in Southern California, with many members working for Kaiser. So we were told this would build a much stronger local, that we would have a lot more clout. What it did was make us the second largest local in SEIU, with the last count I heard, 140,000 members. The largest local in SEIU is 1099, known as United Healthcare Workers East, and they have over 200,000 members. Our local was renamed United Healthcare Workers West, or UHWW. So we refer to ourselves all the time as UHW. The merger, I was suspicious of the merger because bigger in America is not always better, even though there's a constant claim that it's got to get bigger and that automatically makes it better. What it does is extend the size of the membership so broadly that it's very hard to be communicating and getting to know shop stewards from other hospitals. And what I see is bigger doesn't necessarily mean more power. Our union, when it comes to Kaiser, is very lackluster in enforcing the grievance procedure. Part of the reason is something that came up about 1999, which was the labor management partnership with Kaiser. And that is a coalition of unions that agreed to work with Kaiser in a more collaborative way, but only on issues that were non-contractual. In 2005, we negotiated our second 5-year contract. At the same time, we negotiated something called the National Agreement for Kaiser Permanente, the coalition of Kaiser Permanente unions. We ratified both agreements in approximately November of 2005. And it wasn't too long till we got our pretty blue book with all of our national ideals and goals, and pie in the sky, as Joe Hill would have called it. The actual agreement we voted on, we have yet to see. And we are expected as shop stewards to enforce a contract that the last printing that they let us have is August of '05. It's a tentative agreement. Now, it doesn't have the entire text, and we've been waiting for 2 years for a copy of our real contract. Members constantly ask me, hey, when is that contract coming out? And I have to say, now, I tried to find out what was going on with it. I heard various stories until I went to Division Steward Council in Oakland and did hear that the holdup is, this is an agreement between Kaiser, Northern California, and Southern California. The state of all the Kaiser facilities in the state of California with UHW. And the holdup is allegedly Southern California Kaiser doesn't like this agreement, and they're nitpicking it to death. So they keep coming up with revisions. And the head of our Kaiser division in the union is Ralph Cornejo. And Ralph is supposed to be meeting, I'm trying to give him the benefit of the doubt here, meeting with Kaiser negotiators in Southern California. But I don't understand why this should take so long and why there hasn't been a complaint filed with the National Labor Relations Board for stalling. Our union doesn't do much of anything to fight Kaiser, quite honestly, except us as shop stewards in the workplace. And it's very frustrating to see, for instance, grievances not filed, because we're supposed to work them out. We're supposed to work out our disagreements with our managers through the partnership. I go to meeting after meeting, and I tell shop stewards, I tell members, and I tell Kaiser management, if it's contractual, you can't use LMP. The national agreement, we were told because we don't have our real agreement that we ratified 2 years ago, we should be using the national agreement. So a friend of mine submitted it to the labor board. Guess what, folks? This is not a contract. This does not fit in any way, shape, or form the definition of a contract. It does not have wages, it does not have terms of employment, and it does not have working conditions. It has a lot of wishes, but it would not, there is no way to enforce this agreement. Therefore, it's not even worthy of the term contract. It's a gentleman's agreement by a group of people that I'm not sure are gentlemen. But anyway, I'll fill you in on a few events that have happened. It's hard to, I'm glad you've laid the groundwork to explain Andy Stern, head of our international. A lot of things have been happening both in my facility and throughout Northern California because I'm able to have contact with a lot of members. I'm chair of the bargaining committee for medical transcription in post-bargaining talks. Kaiser agreed in the contract for 2005 that hard-to-fill positions would have post-bargaining and that would constitute a career ladder and various other issues, recruitment, things like that. I've also, and those members of the committee were elected at their facilities. We have about 14 members. Kaiser has approximately 14, not facilities, but regions. Sometimes you have a hospital and then several clinics or other facilities attached. I work at Kaiser Santa Clara, which is a teaching hospital, and it has 4 or 5 satellite clinical areas. The facilities. Lately I hear everything that's going on in Northern California. People hear about me being on the committee, and I don't mince words. I will send off an email and tell the worker not only what's wrong with Kaiser, but what's wrong with our union. So I guess I'm beginning to be seen as, the knight on the white horse, and I have to explain to people, as I do to Steve, that I can't fix this mess. This union is too big, and Kaiser is too big to fix it. But that doesn't mean I won't battle to try to fix it. So that's what we're basically doing now. Through that network, and I have to say I owe a great debt of gratitude to my coworker, Melinda Wilson. I will always give her credit. She's a trained paralegal, and she sorts through and sifts through the net and finds the most remarkable information. And one of the things she found was a recent labor board decision that was filed by, and by the way, any of the things I'm talking about today are available online, and in the back of the room on the table, I have a list of web links to find these documents. The case is, this was a case, a decision was rendered in December 2006. Charles Barnes, a shop steward in Walnut Creek, versus SEIU Healthcare Workers West. Charles Barnes was an activist shop steward in Walnut Creek. And when he became an activist, his supervisor started targeting him, retaliating against him, giving him a hard time. So he asked another shop steward to file grievances on his behalf. Now, no one tells our members that when a shop steward is under fire, they are not to be represented by another shop steward. They are to be represented by the field rep. And when I tell a field rep, you need to represent the shop steward, they agree. But it's kept secret. So this other shop steward, not knowing that, and probably, the field rep knew, but he let it proceed. The shop steward filed the grievances, and then they sat there the way grievances have a tendency to do at Kaiser, not moving forward, not following the timelines. We have timelines of 30 days to file from an initial event and 10 days for the employer to respond. These timelines have traditionally been waived by both the union and Kaiser, which allows our grievances to go into a black hole. So Charles started complaining and being very loud about it and telling the Steward Council and talking to everybody about it. So what did the Steward Council under the leadership of the field rep Greg Tegenkamp do? They held a quick meeting with very little explanation and a total surprise to Charles Barnes, and they fired him as shop steward. And then they proceeded to fire the shop steward who had represented him. Now, those shop stewards don't know that no one can fire you as a shop steward except the members whom you represent, who elected you to represent them. Steward councils do not have that power, but they decided they did because most steward councils consist of untrained stewards with very little knowledge, who most of them have never heard of the National Labor Relations Board or the Act. So Charles filed an unfair labor practice against his union. And in December of last year, a judge found in his favor and ordered his reinstatement as a shop steward. I don't know if he accepted that. I did try to contact him, but haven't heard back. But it's interesting that our union thinks that they can fire shop stewards. And what was the outcome? The judge, almost in every page, he talks about the field rep and what a liar he thinks he is. What a poor witness he was on the witness stand. So Greg, who was the field rep for the Diablo service area, Martinez, Walnut Creek, Vallejo, I believe Vallejo, several facilities, got transferred. he lives a few blocks from his new facility, which is Kaiser San Francisco, which is considered by field reps in UHW as consignment to hell. The shop stewards there run a goon squad, according to the stories I've heard. I'm now in contact with several workers at San Francisco, and they confirm that if you don't do what the shop steward wants, you get threatened with bodily injury. And now Greg has to take that short trip and serve there. And we were speculating why Greg got sent to San Francisco. And I thought it was because he was almost in a fist fight with the supervisor of the transcriptionists in the most anti-union of our facilities at Martinez. But when we saw this judgment, we decided Greg didn't lie well enough, and that's why Greg's at San Francisco. In my own steward council, and previous to I transferred to Santa Clara about 1.5 years ago from Santa Teresa Community Hospital, and I had thought the steward council there was very difficult to work with because they loved the LMP. That's not the case in most facilities. The labor management partnership seemed to them to give them a chance to schmooze with managers and feel like they were true equals. Well, we know the Labor Act says when you're acting as a shop steward, you are the equal of management. But that doesn't mean you're buddies with management. But they liked being buddies with management at Santa Teresa. So I transferred to Santa Clara. My impression, I had done some teaching on workers' comp and employee safety issues to that particular steward council. And they seemed rather, pro-union. So I thought, okay, this will be an okay experience. So I transferred. And after 3 months, I ran as shop steward, not for my department, but for the medical secretaries of the facility. And that's our title. Most of us do transcription, but I dared to run to represent people in more than one department. And the head of the steward council was also what they call now, they have a new position called contract specialist. And I had a meeting with her because she was allegedly upset, at which she screamed and cried. Now, she didn't even know me, and I was trying to explain the logic. I believe in the future, representation of members by shop stewards has to be by job description. Jobs are getting more and more complicated. There are multiple jobs in one department, each of which can be drastically different. And if we're going to give good representation to members, we need to understand their work, and we need to be working alongside them. The contract specialist is a new position, came out of that national agreement. One shop steward each year will serve by volunteering, by applying with their resume and all to Ralph Cornejo, will serve for a year as the contract specialist, which is more or less a liaison with management. And for that year, they leave their job, it's held open for them, so they can return to it after that year. And they are paid exclusively by Kaiser. So we have the employer paying the shop steward to represent the union. And there's something I've heard before about serving two masters that I think applies here. But they also have started at UHW. I think this comes from on high. I didn't find the links for the bylaws for our union and for our steward council, but they're starting to create steward hierarchies in which stewards get titles, and they get their titles determined by a vote of the steward council. They have something called the chief steward, and the chief steward is not elected by the entire steward council, but only by the shop stewards of various departments. And our steward council 2 months ago decided 5 chief stewards weren't enough, so they elected 5 more. We now have 10 chief stewards. What I call chief stewards are professional stewards because they're never in the workplace. They are supposed to represent their coworkers, but they're constantly in meetings with management, doing political activity, doing everything else except representing the workers. Kaiser Santa Teresa, when I left, I told them, you're making a big mistake, because they created a hierarchy with chief stewards, lead stewards, mentor stewards, stewards, and new stewards. And they published a list like that, and I held it up in Steward Council and said, and I was out sick when they voted this in, so they didn't hear my opinion, but I explained to them what person who needs representation is going to call the new steward on the list. They're all going to want the chiefs. And you've created a hierarchy in which representation is not equal, where there's no equality within the structure of the union officers. The last thing we need is a hierarchy or a lack of egalitarianism in our unions, and that's exactly what I believe SEIU is heading for. So what we have now, for instance, when we had the mergers, the recent mergers, our union brought in parts of Local 535 into UHW if they were involved in patient health care. So it ended up that the psychologists, the social workers, and the marriage and family therapists who were part of 535 found themselves members of UHW. So I work in a building off-site, and they moved the psychiatry department into that building. When they were creating the chief stewards, and I opposed it, it was a done deal before we ever sat down to discuss it, and they carved up their territories. And I said, why is the building on Tantow, what do you want us to do? And they said, well, you're not a satellite, you don't have any members except your department in radiology, so we're not, basically to hell with you. And so then since then I've been meeting with members. I'm ready to set up brown bag lunches. I have found 124 members in our building, more than any of the satellites have. 60 of them are professionals, and I was told at Steward Council in February that while these people had come into the union, we should not be speaking with them. And so I raised my hand, of course, and said, what's the logic in that? They're brothers and sisters in our union. And by the way, that term is seldom used in UHW. The only time I hear brother and sister in a union is when I go to my classes at City College. But anyway, so I was told by the head, the contract specialist in front of everyone, Ralph says that we need to stay away from them. So I think we need to meet them, don't we? Whatever Ralph says to me, do the opposite. So I'm now working with 4 shop stewards in our building, all of them professionals, who have been unable to get any contact from the field rep assigned to them. And by the way, we have a lot of new young field reps in our union and a lot of good old-timers who had strict trade union principles who are no longer with us or on the way out. They tend to make $20,000 more per year. If you want to know how much money your union spends and how much your staff makes, you go to, on the website, there is under the Department of Labor, there are 2 websites to get information on your union local. So I know that an older field rep that's been there 10 years makes $20,000 more than the man who has been determined to be her boss, and she's now being pressured to find work elsewhere. So I Google these people all the time, and what I've discovered is, to a person, these nice young field reps, recent college graduates, all have political experience. So the one who was supposed to represent these professionals in our union worked on Dennis Kucinich's campaign as a recent graduate of Santa Cruz, UC Santa Cruz. So I have one of the stewards tell me that for 3 months they've been emailing and calling this guy, and he's never contacted them. We have an issue in our building. We found out the building is a Superfund site, and we're being exposed to contamination from TCE and TCA, thanks to Siemens, who owned the building and did electronic assembly there. So when I emailed the head of health and safety, I copied this field rep, and now he's coming down for their next meeting on July 30th. So I guess I hit the right button. Why should we have to do that to get representation? What I'm preparing to do now, the Department of Psychiatry has had no union presence for at least 10 years. I have found out by talking to workers that they're violating the contract up one side and down the other. So I'm starting the brown bag lunches. I've gone in and told them you have to have union bulletin boards. The management there is going to be, if they aren't already, very unhappy. They have a nice big bulletin board for the LMP, and I'm sure they love the LMP. But I was told by one of the supervisors that my brown bag lunches wouldn't have much attendance because everybody there is happy and not very interested in the union. And from what they're telling me, I think they're going to be at the brown bag lunches. But again, this is part of the whole hierarchical structure of UHW. They are determined, I believe, in keeping any of us from speaking to each other. Organizing is something that doesn't just happen when you go into a non-union place and convince the workers to sign the cards and have the election to become a union. Organizing never stops. Educating never stops, and agitating never stops. You continue to do it with the unionized workforce in much the same way you had to do it to get those people to sign the cards. Shop stewards need to commit to this. Instead of being led around by their nose. They need to go take some classes and really learn how to be a shop steward. We have 2 days of, UHW has 2 days of shop steward training that is so minimal, and I have never known of our union to sit down with the Steward Council or any other group of stewards and read the contract. Most of the shop stewards in our facility have never read their contract. So, you're not going to have a very effective union that way. But anyway, I'm taking too long here, I realize. So I will talk about the two things. And I'm not going to touch on health and safety today other than to tell you now that not only are we still struggling with the issues of injury to medical transcriptionists, but now we find we're living on top of a toxic waste site. And I have to deal with that too. Everyone's looking to me to somehow rescue them, and all I can do is get EPA in there and the Water Board, which is responsible for that. But the final thing is the thing that should make a news article in the paper. I was called yesterday by George Rain from the Chronicle. We're circulating petitions throughout all of UHW that are addressed to the International Executive Board, read Andy Stern, because Sal Roselli is in a dispute with Andy Stern. And the dispute is over the democracy of our union. Now, we're being told, and we're supposed to tell the workers that we're fighting right now for the soul of our union. I think what we're fighting for is that little flickering flame of democracy that still exists. And the way it exists is in representation in bargaining. I was elected to represent my fellow workers on transcription issues, and last week I was elected to represent the entire Health Information Management Department, of which I'm a member, in bargaining new job descriptions as they introduce the electronic medical record, which will drastically change people's job descriptions and the way they do their work. What Andy Stern is proposing, and he's starting, I believe, with the nursing home division, is that the International will do the bargaining. There will be no rank and file on bargaining committees. And what I like to, it's totally wrong. And this is what I tell workers to a person, even those who aren't so pro-union have signed the petition as I circulate it, because they understand that. And the way they understand that, and the way I depict it is, do you want people like me to go and bargain for your your concerns? Or do you want some white guys in suits from Washington, D.C., who have never worked in healthcare to come in and bargain for you? And they all say no, they don't want that. I don't go into the moral basis of our union because I think my fellow workers feel there isn't much of a moral basis there, but they do understand bargaining. And their second question is always, where the hell is our contract? Which I can't present to them, but you know, I think we need a petition drive to ask for a printed contract. So if there are any UHW members here today who haven't signed the petition, which reads, we, the undersigned members of SEIU UHW, believe the following to be basic principles for any employer agreement. We call upon the SEIU International Executive Board to require that any employer agreement with SEIU include the following. A voice for quality care. We must be able to advocate effectively for our patients, residents, and consumers. Union democracy. We must have a seat at the bargaining table and the final vote on any employer, any employer agreement that affects us, and full collective bargaining rights. New members should not be locked permanently into substandard contracts without a voice, a vote, and the right to engage in concerted collective action. The struggle between Sal Roselli and Andy Stern is pivotal to the survival of what we might term a union. Because if Andy Stern wins, those union contracts won't be worth the paper they're written on. And here is a good example of it. The California Alliance Agreement, which is available online, of all places, we've searched and searched for this. Labor Notes contacted me and said they have attorneys. They'd like to take a look at this so-called agreement. It wasn't available from our union, so Melinda found it on the National Right to Work site. And I'm going to tell you right now, start looking at that site. It's full of information on sanctions against unions. And we need to know when the Labor Board finds fault with our local and why. We need to know when workers lose the struggle and when they win. And we know when they win better than we know when they lose. When workers win, our local likes to tell us that. They present it at Labor Council. When they win on a Labor Board charge, they distribute the letter to everybody. When they lose, you never hear anything. This California Alliance Agreement was a deal cut between UHW and an alliance of nursing home operators in the state of California. And that alliance agreement means that those workers, they agreed they would let UHW in to organize in certain selected nursing homes, but not all of them. And what the workers got out of that did sign their cards and vote for the union, was an agreement. Now this is not I don't know where the final agreement is. The copy is a corrected copy that's on that website. It does name Sal Roselli. It names several other locals that were involved in it. And what it does is it means workers get a so-called union. It reminds me of the old company unions that were during the heyday of the union struggle. Companies, in order to dodge the bullet, so to speak, would form an alliance with their employees that was totally company dominated. This was true of the Pullman Porter car workers. They had something called the ERP, but it wasn't a real union. With Alliance, the members have to pay union dues, and they're probably pretty hefty. Most of our dues are. And they basically got a small raise in their wages, but they have absolutely no say on issues in the workplace. That's not worthy of calling a union contract. It was a contract or an agreement between this alliance and UHW, and lo and behold, a month or so ago, Sal Roselli wrote a paper about how bad it is and how they don't want to continue that route. That was the first break in the dam. Sal Roselli, by saying that, was opposing Andy Stern. And then the next step is this attempt to take away worker involvement in bargaining. So like I said, if anybody here is a UHW member and they haven't signed the petition, I hope they will do it today here. But this is such an interesting thing to me. I was told about this before anybody in any Steward Council knew it. My field rep came to me and said, listen, this is what's going on. The only people who knew at that point were the e-board members and the field reps. They had a 2-day intensive weekend, Mother's Day weekend in Oakland with Sal Roselli going over the facts of this issue. And then it was leaked to me, and I had to say, why little old me? I know Sal tries to dodge me if he sees me coming, but, you know, and Ralph, but why me? Oh, I know why. Andy Stern wants to keep this out of the press. And Sal doesn't want to totally offend Andy by going to the press himself. So, and field rep knows I'm coming to this meeting because I committed to it, 2 or 3 weeks ago. And so I tell the field rep, I'll leak it. It's fine with me, you know, if anybody cares. So yesterday I get the call from George Rain from the San Francisco Chronicle, and this guy is supposedly their labor reporter, and he tells me he called Sal Roselli, called the headquarters, but they had no comment. And I don't know, Steve, did you give him my name? Okay, good, thank you. So he called me, and first of all, I tell him about the declaration of the e-board, that
some of the things. I started in San Francisco, so I've experienced 790, 535, 616, 707, and then 415, and now I'm in 6434. And see, I'm doing home care now because I became disabled due to toxic problems in Muni when I worked there underground San Francisco, which is not the healthiest part of San Francisco. So I do home care for the person that I live with and have been in several counties, seeing how they operate in several different counties. We were in local 415 with the county, city, colleges, some other workers. We were about a third of that union. Let's see. There's a lot of stories, but I don't want to get into details of too many of them right now because a lot of things have happened. We've gone through enormous changes in the last couple of years. We fired the executive director. There was a huge strike. Then we were in an agreement with local nearby 715 in, what county? 715, you probably know. And then we were merged. We had the hearings. We went and got merged with 6434. So now we're we were 1,400 people, part of 1/3 of a larger local, and now we're part of a local that has 190,000 members. So most, and I don't know how much, is anybody else involved in home care? Here, great. Give me your name. Because as you know, home care, we don't have a common workplace. It's very difficult to get the accurate phone numbers of people. Legally, we have that right, but it takes forever, and there's constant changes. So it's the most difficult organizing situation on one hand, but on the other hand, we all work, because we are all separated, we are so excited to go to union meetings, to find somebody, how do you deal with this and that and the other thing? So it's like once you can find people, they're very excited to come to the meetings, as opposed to when I was in 790 and it's like, oh shit, this is Tuesday, we got to go to the union meeting. How can we get out of it? But let's see, we've had, I mean, basically, I arrived there, we were making, $9.50 an hour. Now we're making $10.50 an hour. We have a really horrible health plan. Lucky for me, because I'm retired and sick and on Medicare, I have 3 plans, but people, if that's the only plan you have, it pays $500 a year. So you can imagine what pregnant women feel like, you know, oh gee, $500, you know. if only I can have the baby in January instead of December, I mean, people are strategizing that kind of thing. So no benefits whatsoever. It's very difficult to get replacements, of course, in Santa Cruz. I assume it's similar in San Francisco because you can't afford to live here, unless you're rich and you're taking care of your grandmother. There's just no way you can survive doing home care. So we've gone through a lot of changes, and most people don't even realize they're in a union anymore until, they see what's this $20 taken from in my paycheck. And so we were merged. So the problem we had before was we had a staffer who took care of the political issues in an election year. And by the way, he took care of 1,400 people that were totally unorganized, and he had several other sections that he took care of. So we got very little attention. And we're constantly calling people. I call a list of 10 people, and like most of the phones, she doesn't, the phone was disconnected, or people died, or who they were taking care of died, and they're not there anymore, and you get 2 people, and of course they're not at home, and you finally get somebody after 2 hours, and you're so excited to talk to each other. But the problem was the way the union was organized, we didn't have a lot of resources because we had all these problems, like how to get the damn list and get it updated quickly. And because so many of the other sections had been organized and were better organized, we got very little attention. But, we were connected with each other and sometimes got a lot of attention by particular presidents. Now we're in a local of 190,000, and it's based in, there's more people, there's about 150,000 in the Southern California, and then it's like scattered. There's LA and Ventura and some other county that's part of it, and they're about 150,000, and then there's on the Central Coast, disconnected from the rest, is Monterey County, San Benito, and Santa Cruz, and then you have Alameda and some that go all the way up to Mendocino County. So the problem, and we're only 18,000, so you've got, LA, base, 150, and we're 18,000. And a lot of us are in situations where the counties, like we worked very closely with 715 in San Mateo for a year, and I was being friends with all the home care workers and getting their names and stuff, and now they're in a separate local. So the people we're closest to geographically and organizationally are in a separate local, and now we're trying to figure out, about what's going on in Los Angeles or someplace else. But the good part of it is that the whole local is just home care. So, so in many ways we have many people who understand the very complicated system. We get some money from the state, from the feds, from the county. I mean, it's just really, really complicated, and Arnie's trying to cut us all the time. And so the people are on top of how things have the history of how things should function. And so that's good, but the other side of it is the problems that the 2 speakers before were talking about, because like we're not organized, we don't have, I mean, I hear about your Steward stories, and it's fantastic. I mean, we have a few people who were trained as stewards, and then they had to stop and get another job or move to Arizona because they couldn't afford to live there, and then you got to train some new people who are over their heads trying to figure out what's going on, and you get paid for working 3 hours a day, and if somebody gets sick, it's like you're there 24 hours a day if they live with you. And you're fighting over lungs, it's not sending their medicine, and the doctor didn't look in the book to find out that medicine A colludes with medicine B, and you've got to call him and say, I think he shouldn't be on these meds, but then the health plan won't pay for what he is not allergic to. I mean, you have to do all this work that's not recognized. Plus, like like I lived out in the country, and if you're taking care of somebody who has a special illness and there's no country doctors that can deal with it, you have to drive them to San Francisco, which could take 3 hours. They wait in the office, which could take, whatever, 2 days or something. And you don't get gas paid for, and you don't get the time paid for. So, you have to have somebody that really, really loves you and has some money and some time to take you to a specialist in San Francisco and wait because you don't get paid. And then how are you going to pay your rent and deal with, all the problems that you have? So, I mean, it's like our work situation, because I used to work welfare in Muni, and the work situation is just, it's the whole thing about how work was paid for due to sexism, we're like at the bottom of it all. It's like you all should be working for free. Women have done that, since the beginning of history, and why are we paying you? And a lot of people still think that because they don't quite understand. There's no way most of us can stay home and take care of somebody because we'd be out working, making more money if we could, but we care about the people, so we're working for less money at home, and that's the only choice that we have. So let's see, I've just been to a couple of meetings of the larger local, and, just all I can say at this point is like similar things are happening that have already been described, from being in a larger local. So if we want to fight Arnie in Sacramento, we're better organized to do that. But, how do we fight Arnie, and what do our COPE money go to, and, how independent we're going to be to actually go beyond Arnie and the Democratic Party when we need to do that. That's all questionable about what's okay to do and what's not okay to do.
Those people who were looking towards reform in SEIU, looked at the situation and felt that what we were, as we evaluated, we became more active in the union. We looked around and found a union that was characterized largely with priorities of, forming partnerships and collaboration with management, partnerships and collaboration with politicians and gaining political influence, and sort of regressing into a dues collecting business operation in what some people have, called business unionism. Lower on the prior, and some of the results of this were, contracts that weren't always in the members' best interest. Even some resulted in resistance to improvements in retirement benefits. The rank and file membership organizing for retirement reform found that they weren't supported and were even opposed by the union. And generally found lower on the priority list was basic things like member representation and responding to member calls. And by the way, if some of you are here, that I'm not blanket condemning the hardworking staff at SEIU, because if they couldn't respond to a phone call, which was a common member complaint, it wasn't because that was their choice. It was because they were often assigned to other activities besides representation. It just wasn't the number one priority in the union. And overall, the other complaint we saw was just a lack of democratic governance, a sort of an informal power structure of entrenched cronyism and staff doing things the same way forever. It was more of a staff-directed, top-down style of unionism. And also, I'm sorry to say that there was even elements of gangsterism and thug elements in the union that would resort to physical threats and violence. So in the early part of, early 2000s, there was a reform movement in SEIU, and again, I'm talking about SEIU, the former SEIU 790, and again, also I'll talk a little bit about the nurses who, or the nurses were part of also part represented by 790, okay. The concept came about of a member-driven union, and there were people that were activists in the union that were working to reform the union in that direction. We had new officers, a new officer slate was elected that was dedicated to that concept. New bylaws were introduced, and there were some democratic institutions introduced, including a regional conference in San Francisco that would have chapter representatives that would make policy decisions for the San Francisco region of the local. Out of that conference also there was various election reforms and proposals that were such as having, standardized secret ballot elections for various things such as the Labor Council and the bargaining team. This sort of came to a head, and there was a lot of I call these sort of last straws for some of us who really tried, were going with the route of reform, staying within the union, making it a democratic union. First of all, one of the last straws for me was that a proposal for all chapters to have the same secret ballot election process to elect bargaining team members in 2000 for the 2006 contract was undermined by the union leadership, so that it became optional for different chapters, so that there was still, instead of the members really being given the opportunity to choose their representatives to the bargaining team, there was often other influence and factors that would lead to loyalists, people that were committed to the established status quo being elected. There was also suspensions of some of the hard-working staff, such as Frank Martin del Campo, suspended long-term suspensions twice. He was someone that would work with the members. Other staff we thought were treated poorly. Well, it's just okay, and then what Steve introduced here, of course, was another factor, the continuing indications from the SEIU International, the direction that they were headed in, was the opposite from giving us any hope that there would be democracy in the union. We just, it just became less hopeful. And then there was the prospect, we heard what was coming in terms of the mergers of the the unions all over California into large mega Walmart type unions. This meant that many of us concluded that this would make it even more difficult to organize for reform, less local control. And then on top of all this, there started to be increasing physical threats, intimidation of reform-minded officers when they would speak out. So many of the leaders, including elected officers of the union and chapter activists, came to this point which I would call the return of the Jedi at this part of the story. They had various planning meetings and coming to the conclusion of that it was futile to continue internal struggle, and that the only opportunity left was basically to get out of SEIU and find a better union. And we were committed trade unionists. We're not people that wanted to bust the union to favor management, as we've often been branded. Well, there is a legal process, and that is that you can ask members to sign authorization cards to authorizing another union to represent them. Okay, if you're able to get during a certain prescribed period of time at least 30% of the membership, the represented membership, to sign those cards, then you qualify for an election. So the process of card collection is sort of pre-decertification, and then there's an election where any union can be on the ballot, and members have a choice of their own unions. This seemed to be the most progressive way and most open and democratic way for us to go at this point. You can look back and question the decisions we made and what alternatives we might have had, but at the time that looked like the best course of action. Now, at this point, the part of the story that I could then refer to as the Empire Strikes Back. The SEIU and we just flat out weren't prepared for it, though we should have been. They hit us with everything they had, naturally. And we weren't really prepared to respond effectively. They launched a propaganda misinformation campaign That for one thing, members were confused and threatened with, if you sign these cards, you won't have any more representation, you won't have a contract, and you may even lose your jobs because, of course, SEIU owns your jobs and your bargaining units. Furthermore, the organizers were targeted for harassment and intimidation and defamation as to their, what their motives were. We were called dissidents who were just out for our own interest and power. They sent the bargaining unit one day out to San Francisco Airport where we had a card booth for people to come up and get information about joining the other union. They sent the whole bargaining team plus the staff to the airport and surrounded the booth and generally raised hell and made the people at the booth pretty miserable. Stopped workers from coming up to the booth. They also confronted people, who were, while they were distributing cards, sort of making veiled threats to them while they were trying to get to their car in a parking garage. Some of the organizers later had medical problems, complications, stress and stroke. And so by the middle of April, as a result of the counter campaign, the card collection started to level off. Members reacted to the SEIU tactics, and the people that were all, so in other words, just having widespread dissatisfaction with the union wasn't enough. Members tend to be, to some extent, there's an element of apathy and fear of change that we weren't able to overcome. And also, our organizational effort was in some extent lacking in basic worksite organization, having an organizer at each shift and on each work site. And it's a huge, of course, San Francisco is a huge, far-flung organization. It requires a lot of organization at the ground level. We had part of it. There were places where the members were most dissatisfied. They would all sign cards. Other places where we just couldn't get to. Now, eventually, we got up to close to 1,000 cards, but we really needed about 2,500 cards just to qualify for an election. So we were falling short. Public Employees Union was facing the pressure and so forth. And at that point, a decision was made that the Public Employees Local 1 announced that they wouldn't be able to continue to support the decertification effort